Elijah Turner sat on a cracked bench outside the Gray Line bus terminal, his hands cupped tightly around a paper cup that no longer held coffee, only warmth from memory. In his pocket, folded and refolded 100 times, was a one-way ticket to Chicago. His only ticket, his only chance. He had spent 3 months earning it, collecting cans behind supermarkets, washing windshields at traffic lights, sleeping behind dumpsters when the shelters were full. Every crumpled dollar had been a victory, every coin a step closer to leaving the streets of St. Louis behind. Now he just had to make it through one bus ride. He smoothed out his clothes, a clean shirt from the donation center, a faded jacket missing 2 buttons, and shoes that squeaked when he walked. He'd even found a rusty razor and shaved. In the cloudy reflection of a vending machine, Elijah tried to see the man he used to be, calm, reliable, someone his son could have been proud of, but the reflection only showed tired eyes and hands that trembled from the cold. The loudspeaker crackled overhead. Bus 214 to Chicago boarding now at Gate 5. Elijah stood, clutched his small backpack, the only thing he owned, and made his way to the line. The people ahead of him looked polished, a woman in a tailored coat scrolling her phone, a businessman with silver cufflinks, a mother with a designer stroller. Their eyes slid over him like he wasn't there. He was used to it. At the front of the gate stood Claire Donovan, the young conductor. Her uniform was neat, her hair tied back in a perfect bun. She smiled politely at the first few passengers, scanned their tickets with a quick beep, and nodded them aboard. But when Elijah stepped forward, her smile faltered. Her nose wrinkled slightly. "Sir, can I help you?" He offered his ticket carefully, with both hands, afraid it might tear. "Bus to Chicago," he said quietly. Claire looked him up and down, the worn jacket, the patched knees, the frayed backpack strap, and then the corners of her lips tightened. "This bus is fully booked, sir," she said. Elijah blinked. "The ticket's valid," he said softly, unfolding it so she could see the printed date and seat number. "Gate 5, Bus 214. It's all here." Her voice grew colder. "I understand, but this service is for business-class passengers only. Maybe try one of the local routes." "I paid for this seat," Elijah interrupted, his voice still calm, but firmer now. "I just want to go to Chicago, that's all." The businessman behind him sighed loudly. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, glancing at his watch. Claire straightened. "No, sir. I'm just handling it." Then, turning back to Elijah, she whispered sharply, "Look, you can't get on this bus looking like that. People paid for comfort, not—" She hesitated. "For this." He stood frozen. Around them, eyes turned. Someone chuckled. Another passenger muttered, "Unbelievable." Elijah felt every stare like a blade. He took a step back, his throat dry. "Ma'am," he said softly, "I'm not here to bother anyone. I just need to get home." She crossed her arms. "You need to leave the line, now." For a long moment he just stood there, the wind howling through the open doors, lifting the edges of his ticket. Then he nodded slowly. His voice was quiet, but steady. "I hope someday you never have to beg for a chance." He turned and walked away. The line moved on without pause. Claire exhaled, brushing invisible dust from her sleeve, and waved the next passenger forward. Outside, Elijah sat back down on the cold bench, staring at the ticket still clutched in his hand. The ink was smudged from the rain beginning to fall. He tucked it carefully into his pocket, zipped up his jacket, and started walking. The road ahead stretched gray and endless, and somewhere beyond the horizon waited Chicago, and a life that might still be his if he could just keep moving. But as he walked away from the terminal, the sound of laughter behind him cut deeper than the wind. The rain came harder now, cold and sharp, turning the streets into mirrors of gray. Elijah pulled his jacket tighter around his shoulders as he walked along the side of the highway. Each step splashed through puddles, soaking what little warmth he had left. Cars sped past, spraying him with dirty water, but he kept walking, steady, quiet, like a man trying to outwalk his own shadow. The lights of the bus terminal were already far behind him. He didn't look back. There was nothing there for him anymore. Inside the Donovan Express bus, the air was warm and dry. Claire Donovan walked down the aisle, checking tickets with a satisfied smile. The passengers had settled in, businessmen with laptops. a woman flipping through a glossy magazine, two teenagers watching a movie on a tablet. No one mentioned what had happened at the gate, though she could feel a few smug glances exchanged, the kind that said good for her, keeping things civilized. As she took her seat near the front, Claire looked out through the rain-streaked window. For a moment, she thought she saw a dark figure walking along the shoulder of the road, a man with a small backpack, head bowed against the wind. Her chest tightened unexpectedly. She told herself it wasn't guilt, just pity. He shouldn't have tried to get on that bus looking like that, she thought. He brought it on himself. Still, she couldn't shake the image. The driver, an older man named Frank, cleared his throat. "Miss Donovan, storm's getting worse," he said, adjusting the wipers. "We might need to slow down." Claire shook her head. "We're already behind schedule. My father tracks every route in real time. We can't be late again." Frank muttered something under his breath and shifted gears. The bus rumbled forward, cutting through sheets of rain. Back on the roadside, Elijah trudged on, his shoes squelched with each step. He'd walked nearly 4 miles, his legs aching, his breath misting in the air. He thought of turning back, waiting for morning, but then his hand brushed the folded ticket in his pocket, and he kept going. That paper meant more than a bus ride. It was proof that he could still make plans, still believe in tomorrow. When he reached an old rest stop, he ducked under a metal awning and sat down to rest. His reflection shimmered faintly in a puddle below. Tired eyes, stubble, streaks of mud. He took out the ticket, unfolded it again. The ink had bled in places, but it was still readable. Bus 214, seat 19A, St. Louis, Chicago. He smiled faintly. Seat 19A. He wondered who was sitting there now. In the bus, a young man in a designer coat sat reclined in seat 19A, scrolling his phone. He didn't know that seat had once belonged to someone who had fought months for it. To him, it was just another number on a ticket. Claire walked past and checked the overhead compartments, then sat again, pulling out her own phone. A text from her father flashed on the screen. "Storm tracking north. Be careful and don't be late. We've got investors flying in tonight." She rolled her eyes. Of course, even a thunderstorm couldn't shake her father's obsession with schedules. As the bus climbed onto a stretch of elevated highway, thunder cracked above them, loud enough to make a few passengers jump. Claire forced a professional smile. "Everything's fine, folks. Just a bit of weather," she said, her voice calm but tight. Lightning lit up the dark sky for a split second, and in that flash, she saw it again through the rain-covered window, a man walking alone on the edge of the highway, his figure outlined by passing headlights. It was him, Elijah. She turned her eyes away quickly, her pulse jumping for reasons she didn't understand. Why was he still walking this road? Outside, Elijah squinted against the downpour as the same bus roared past him, spraying his legs with mud. He caught a brief glimpse through the window, faces glowing in the warm light, laughter, comfort. And for an instant, he saw hers too, the same cold, beautiful face that had told him no. He stopped walking. His chest heaved. Then, slowly, he nodded to himself. "Keep walking, Eli," he whispered. "Just keep walking." Behind him, thunder rolled again, deeper, longer this time, echoing across the highway. Somewhere ahead, beyond the curtain of rain, fate was already turning its wheels. By late afternoon, the rain had turned into a downpour so heavy it blurred the horizon into a smear of silver and gray. The highway twisted through hills and open fields, now half-flooded, slick with water and oil. The sound of the storm was constant, a low, unending roar that seemed to swallow everything human. Inside the Donovan Express bus, the lights flickered from the strain of the wind. Passengers had gone quiet. Conversations faded into nervous silence as the rain battered the windows. Frank, the driver, leaned forward, squinting through the blur of wipers. His knuckles were white on the wheel. Claire stood behind him, trying to keep her balance as the bus jolted over a pothole. "Can you slow down just a little?" she asked, her tone softer than usual. Frank gave a dry laugh. "You told me not to earlier." "I know," she muttered, "but this is getting worse." Thunder cracked again, close this time, and a blue-white flash illuminated the fields. For a brief moment Claire could see her own reflection in the glass, the professional mask she always wore, flawless and composed, but now it looked brittle, trembling at the edges. The bus hit another patch of water and skidded slightly. Gasps erupted from the passengers. Frank corrected it with a grunt. "Damn near hydroplaned." Claire's phone buzzed in her pocket. She fumbled it out. Another message from her father. "Weather alert along Route 17. Reroute if necessary. Don't make me call dispatch again." Her jaw tightened. Always watching. Always in control. She locked the screen and shoved the phone away. A few miles back, Elijah was still walking. His steps were slower now, each one an effort. The road had become a river of mud and rain, and his clothes clung to him like a second skin. Cars whooshed past, spraying him with more water. No one stopped. He saw a faded road sign, Chicago, 188 miles. His laugh came out as a cough. It sounded strange in the storm, small, almost swallowed by the wind. When the lightning came, he used it to check the shoulder of the road. It flashed every few seconds, lighting up his path for an instant, like the world was giving him just enough light to take one more step. Then, through the storm's curtain, he saw something ahead, dim red taillights cutting through the fog. The bus. It had pulled far ahead earlier, but now it was crawling, struggling against the storm. He felt a strange pull seeing it again, like fate wasn't done with them yet. Inside, the mood grew tense. A baby started crying. Someone asked if they should pull over. Claire did her best to calm everyone, though her own hands trembled as she held the rail. "It's just a bad patch," she said. "We'll be fine." But Frank shook his head. "This isn't just a bad patch. Wind's pushing hard. Brakes aren't catching like they should." He turned slightly, and she saw it. Fear. Real fear in a man who'd driven for 30 years. "Frank," she whispered, "should we stop?" "Not here. Too much water. The shoulder's soft. We could tip." The bus hit another slick curve, sliding slightly to the right. People shouted. Someone dropped a suitcase. It rolled down the aisle, bumping into a man's legs. Claire forced herself to stay composed, shouting over the noise, "Everyone stay seated. It's going to be okay." But her voice cracked on the last word. Outside, Elijah saw the headlights ahead flicker oddly, then tilt, like the vehicle had swerved. He frowned and started walking faster, then running. Rain slapped his face, his shoes sliding in the mud, breath coming in hard bursts. The road curved ahead, and beyond it, a narrow bridge over a low valley. He saw the bus skid again, fishtail once, twice, the massive wheels churning up waves of water. Come on," he breathed, as if willing it to stay upright. But the wind howled again, and with a deafening crash of thunder, the back end of the bus slammed against the guardrail. Metal screamed. Sparks flew in the darkness as the bus slid sideways, its headlights spinning wildly through the storm. And then, silence. Inside, chaos. The impact threw passengers from their seats. Glass shattered. Screams filled the cabin. The bus tilted, groaning as it came to rest against the edge of the road, half in the ditch. Claire hit her head against a pole, blood trickling down her temple. Her vision swam. She could hear the driver cursing, someone crying, the baby screaming. "Everyone stay calm," she shouted. But the words didn't sound like hers. They were distant, muffled by ringing in her ears. Through the broken windshield she saw the rain still falling, and beyond it, darkness. They were stranded. And the smell of gasoline was growing stronger. Far down the road, Elijah stopped running and stared. The bus's lights were still faintly glowing through the storm, tilted, broken. He could see smoke, or maybe mist, rising from the ditch. His legs moved before his mind caught up. He dropped his backpack, sprinting toward the wreck, slipping, falling, getting up again. Each step brought him closer to the wreckage, and as he ran, the memory of burning houses flashed before his eyes. Screams, smoke, the heat of fire. The same night that had ended his career, his home, his life. Now, years later, fate was calling him back into the flames. The bus groaned as it finally came to rest, teetering at a precarious angle on the edge of the rain-slicked ditch. Windows were shattered, metal twisted, the acrid scent of fuel filling the cabin. Passengers were coughing, bleeding, crying, some huddled in corners, some gripping each other in terror. Claire Donovan blinked through the haze of pain. Her head throbbed, and her hands shook as she tried to push herself upright. She caught sight of the back of the bus, The baby crying, the elderly woman gasping for air, someone pinned under a seat. Panic surged like an electric shock. Then, a figure appeared through the rain and smoke. A man, wet, mud-splattered, determined, Elijah Turner. He didn't hesitate. His old instincts, honed during years as a firefighter, kicked in immediately. He ran toward the bus, assessing every detail in a glance: the tilt, the broken glass, the leaking fuel, the terrified passengers. He reached the bus and grabbed a length of jagged metal lying nearby. Using it like a lever, he pried open a twisted window. The smell of gasoline was overwhelming, but he blocked it out. One by one, he started helping passengers through. First came a small child, crying and clutching a stuffed bear. Elijah wrapped the child in his jacket and passed it to a young woman waiting on the ground. Then he went back in for the elderly woman who had panic written all over her face. He lifted her carefully, whispering, "It's okay, you're safe now." The bus rocked dangerously with each movement. Claire, seeing him through the chaos, felt her chest tighten. That man, the one she had dismissed at the gate, was the only person keeping them alive. Elijah ignored the splintering wood and jagged metal cutting at his hands. He moved quickly, efficiently, saving passengers one after another. Every action was precise, every motion measured. Hold on, he shouted as he reached the driver. Frank was unconscious, slumped over the wheel. Elijah lifted him out with all his strength and laid him gently on the wet ground. A sudden spark ignited near the back of the bus, the smell of gasoline turning into the acrid bite of fire. Flames licked the edge of the vehicle, climbing the metal frame. Elijah's pulse surged, adrenaline flooding his veins. One look inside told him someone was still trapped. He didn't stop. He slid under a fallen beam, wincing as it cut his forearm, and found the last passenger, a man pinned by a broken seat. With a grunt, he lifted the debris, freeing him just as the fire reached the floor. He staggered out, coughing, mud and soot covering his face and hands. Around him, passengers huddled together, soaked, shivering, alive. Then he heard it, a cry of desperation, closer this time. His heart skipped. Claire. Her leg was caught under a twisted support beam near the front. Blood seeped from a cut on her temple, her eyes wide with fear. Elijah ran toward her without hesitation, ignoring the burning heat creeping along the edges of the bus. "Claire, hold on, I've got you." He lifted her carefully, shielding her body with his own as he crawled through the mud and flames to reach safety. The bus creaked ominously, metal twisting, paint peeling from the heat. Behind them, a deafening sound. Part of the bus structure gave way, flames surging higher, smoke curling into the stormy sky. He dropped to the ground, pulling Claire clear, just as the bus erupted in a shower of sparks and twisted steel. The roar of fire and collapsing metal filled the night. Elijah turned back, chest heaving, soot on his face, arms scraped and bleeding. Every passenger he had saved was now gathered together, shivering, wet, staring at him as though he were a hero plucked from legend. And Claire, lying on the mud with him beside her, looked up at him with wide, uncomprehending eyes. For the first time, the world that had judged him at the terminal, the polished seats, the luxury, the moneyed faces, didn't matter. Only one truth remained. He had saved them all, and they owed their lives to the man they had once deemed unworthy. The flames licked the edges of the bus, smoke curling into the stormy night. The smell of burning rubber and fuel was suffocating, but Elijah didn't hesitate. He moved from passenger to passenger, pulling them out through shattered windows and doors. Children, elderly, strangers, all alive because he acted without thought for himself. His arms burned from the metal edges, cuts running down his hands, but he didn't stop. Claire's scream echoed from the front. Her leg was trapped under a fallen beam. Elijah sprinted through the chaos, ignoring the heat, and lifted the beam off her. He shielded her with his body, crawling to safety as the bus shifted dangerously behind them. Finally, everyone was out. Passengers huddled in the rain, soaked and trembling. Elijah dropped beside them, chest heaving, soot covering his face. Claire's eyes found him, fear and shock mingled with awe. The man she had humiliated hours ago, the one she had called unworthy, had just saved every life on that bus. For a moment, no one spoke. Only the storm and the crackling fire filled the night. Elijah's breath was ragged. He looked at the wreck, at the chaos he had emerged from, and whispered to himself, I didn't do it for them. I did it because it had to be done. And somewhere inside, he felt the first flicker of hope he'd had in years. As the flames danced around the bus, Elijah thought everyone was safe. But then he heard it, a faint, desperate cry. "Help! Please!" He spun toward the rear. Through the smoke and flickering light, he saw a figure pinned beneath a twisted seat, a young man clutching his chest, eyes wide with terror. The heat singed Elijah's jacket as he sprinted back, ignoring the pain in his scraped arms. "Hold on! I've got you!" he shouted. With a surge of strength, he lifted the metal seat just enough for the man to crawl free. The last passenger stumbled into the rain, coughing, shaking, alive. Then he heard another voice, clearer now. Claire. She hadn't made it far. Blood trickled from her temple, and her ankle was twisted. Without hesitation, Elijah dropped to his knees and shielded her, moving her slowly through the mud and rain to a safe distance. The bus groaned behind them, a final scream of metal and glass as flames consumed the vehicle. Sparks flew, smoke billowed, and Elijah barely made it to the edge before the rear section collapsed entirely. Everyone was accounted for, everyone, except the fear still lingering in their eyes. Claire looked up at him, soaked, dirty, trembling. The pride and arrogance she had shown at the terminal were gone, replaced by awe and a deep, unspoken shame. Elijah turned to face the burning bus, chest heaving. The rain pelted his face, washing soot and blood into rivulets. And yet, through the exhaustion and pain, a small, quiet satisfaction settled over him. He had done what no one else could. He had saved them all. The first responders arrived as dawn broke, their sirens slicing through the storm's aftermath. Firefighters doused the smoldering wreck, while paramedics guided the passengers to ambulances. Elijah sat on the muddy ground, chest heaving, soaked, bleeding, and utterly exhausted. The adrenaline had faded, leaving only aching muscles and raw cuts on his arms. Passengers whispered among themselves, pointing at him. Some thanked him, some stared in disbelief. Claire was carried on a stretcher, her leg elevated, a pale smear of blood across her temple. She turned her head toward Elijah, tears mixing with rainwater on her face. For the first time, she didn't speak with authority or arrogance, only silent shock and gratitude. The storm had passed, leaving a gray, sodden silence. The highway was littered with debris, shattered glass reflecting the weak morning light. And Elijah, still sitting in the mud, realized something he hadn't felt in years. He mattered. Somewhere in the crowd a reporter murmured, "Did you see that? That man? He saved them all." A camera clicked, capturing Elijah's soot-covered, tired face. Even the wealthy passengers who had once judged him at the gate now looked at him differently, with awe, respect, and perhaps a touch of shame. Elijah leaned back on his hands, staring at the wreckage. His legs ached, his arms throbbed, his heart still raced. But amidst the chaos and pain, a quiet thought settled in his mind. Maybe this is the start of something else. By mid-morning, the story had spread. Passengers spoke to police officers and reporters, their voices shaky but insistent. He saved us, all of us. Claire Donovan, still on a stretcher, was questioned first. She hesitated, glancing toward Elijah, who was sitting on the curb, exhausted but upright. Her pride warred with reality. Finally, she whispered, It was him, the man I refused at the terminal." Her words were enough to ignite the frenzy. Officers spoke to witnesses, confirmed injuries, and then someone showed the security footage from the terminal. There it was, Elijah Turner, ticket in hand, humbly asking to board. Then Claire's rejection, the laughter, the sneers. Richard Donovan, her father, arrived at the scene soon after. Seeing the wrecked bus and the emergency response, his face hardened. "A man caused this chaos?" he demanded. "No, sir," a police officer replied. "A man prevented it. He saved every passenger. He's the reason no one died." Richard's eyes scanned the crowd, stopping on Elijah. Mud, soot, cuts on his arms and hands, clothes ruined, yet standing, steady, unshaken. "A homeless man?" he asked, incredulous. "Yes, sir," the officer confirmed. "He acted without hesitation. He saved everyone on board, including your daughter." Claire looked away, ashamed. She had thought of him as beneath notice, yet here he was, alive, calm, the hero of a disaster she barely survived. Cameras flashed. Witnesses whispered. Social media had already started buzzing. Homeless hero saves bus passengers during storm. Video clips showed him dragging people from the wreckage, carrying Claire to safety, shielding others from flames. Richard's jaw tightened, and for the first time in years, he seemed uncertain. He had always believed that success, wealth, and power defined a person's worth. Now, standing before Elijah, he realized that value could come from courage and heart, from someone he had dismissed without thought. Elijah, tired and mud-streaked, simply watched the commotion. He didn't boast. He didn't demand recognition. He only had one thought: I did what had to be done. And for the first time, that was enough. By late afternoon, the hospital room was quiet, save for the occasional beep of monitors and the soft rustle of sheets. Elijah Turner sat on the edge of the bed, cleaning the dried mud from his arms with a damp cloth. His muscles ached, every joint protesting, but he barely noticed. His mind was still racing from the events of the storm, the crash, the fire, and the look in Claire's eyes when she saw him emerge from the flames. Claire Donovan had finally been moved into a private room. Her leg was set in a cast, her temple wrapped, but her posture was rigid, her hands fidgeting nervously in her lap. She hadn't spoken much since arriving, and when she did, her words came haltingly. I keep thinking about what happened," she said finally, her voice low, almost hesitant. "About the bus. About you." Elijah looked up. His eyes were tired but steady. "You don't need to talk about it," he said softly. "I did what anyone should have done." "No," she replied quickly, shaking her head. "Not anyone. Not anyone else. You saved us all. You didn't just act out of duty. You risked yourself in a way most people wouldn't even imagine." He shrugged, trying to hide the swell of pride. "Maybe I'm just stubborn." She gave a small, ironic laugh. "Stubborn or brave?" "I think it's both." She paused, biting her lip. "My father, he'll want to meet you. He's used to giving orders, but he's seen the footage, heard the reports, and he's impressed." Elijah tensed slightly. Meetings with the Donovans were not exactly part of his plan for the day or the month, but he nodded slowly. "If he wants to see me, fine. I'm not going anywhere." Claire leaned forward, her eyes searching his. "I need you to understand something. My father, he's not like the people you've dealt with before. He'll want to make things right. He'll offer you something. Don't dismiss it. You earned it." Elijah swallowed. The thought of accepting anything from them, from her father, felt uncomfortable. Years of living on the streets had taught him to take nothing, but at the same time, there was a flicker of hope, a glimpse of possibility, a chance to finally leave the past behind. Hours later, the door opened, and Richard Donovan entered. He was tall, imposing, perfectly groomed, but his expression was uncharacteristically serious. He looked at Elijah, taking in the soot-streaked, mud-stained figure sitting quietly on the hospital bed. "You're the man who saved my daughter," he said bluntly. His tone was firm, but there was an undercurrent of respect. "And all the passengers, every single one of them." Elijah nodded. "I did what had to be done." Richard leaned against the doorframe, studying him for a long moment. "Most people would have panicked. Most people wouldn't have risked themselves, but you acted without hesitation." Elijah's jaw tightened. "I didn't do it for praise." "No," Richard said softly, almost contemplatively. "But I think it's time you accept that the world owes you more than just thanks. I want to help you, Mr. Turner. There are opportunities. Work, housing, support, anything you need to get your life back on track. I can't erase the past, but I can offer a start." Elijah's heart pounded. Offers like this, stability, safety, dignity, were alien to him. He had survived on scraps, on rain and cold, on the mercy of strangers. Accepting help felt strange, almost uncomfortable. But the weight of what he had done tonight, the lives he had saved, made him realize maybe he deserved it. Claire watched silently, her hands folded in her lap. There was no arrogance now, no pride, only gratitude, awe, and a quiet understanding that Elijah had become more than the homeless man she had judged hours ago. Finally, Elijah exhaled. I'll think about it," he said quietly. "I need to make sure I do it right. No shortcuts." Richard nodded, a faint smile breaking his stern features. Fair enough. But know this, you have a choice now, a real choice, and whatever you decide, you've already proven your worth to more people than you know. Elijah leaned back, feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and hope. The storm had ended, the fire had burned itself out, and now, for the first time in years, he could imagine a future. One where survival wasn't just about the next day, but about living, truly living. And for the first time, he allowed himself to hope. The days after the bus crash passed in a blur of hospital visits, interviews, and endless questions. Reporters wanted his story. Passengers wanted to shake his hand again. Some even brought flowers. Elijah Turner, the man who had lived in alleyways and slept under bridges, had become a local hero overnight. Yet he felt strangely removed from it all, like a spectator watching someone else's life unfold. Claire Donovan recovered steadily, her leg in a cast, but her spirit shaken more deeply than her body. She visited Elijah daily, sometimes just sitting silently beside him, offering water or a sandwich. Words had been said, apologies made, but the silence between them held its own weight. Finally, one evening, she spoke with a sincerity that surprised even her. You saved my life, and the others. And I can't stop thinking about it, about you, about how easily I judged you without knowing anything. Elijah looked down at his hands, still scarred and stained. You don't have to understand me, he said quietly. I did what I could. That's all anyone can do. She shook her head. No, I need to understand. I need to see you beyond the label everyone put on you. You're not just the homeless man. You're you. He allowed himself a faint smile. It felt foreign, almost dangerous, to let someone see him like that. But her gaze held no condescension, only respect, and something deeper, something that made his chest tighten. Richard Donovan, meanwhile, was patient but persistent. He offered Elijah a place to stay, access to job training, and even the chance to speak publicly about his experience. Yet Elijah hesitated. Trust had not come easily to him. Years of living on the streets had taught him that promises were fragile, and people often vanished when you needed them most. One evening, he stood by the window of the hospital room, looking out at the rain-washed city. The streetlights reflected off puddles like molten gold. For a moment, he thought about the path that had brought him here, the months of scrimping for a bus ticket, the rejection at the terminal, the storm, the crash, and realized that everything had led to this crossroads. He could go back to the streets, to the life he knew, familiar though brutal. Or he could step forward into a world that might finally accept him, a world he had only glimpsed through the chaos of fire and rain. Elijah felt the weight of choice pressing down on him, but he also felt something he hadn't in years, possibility. Not just survival, but life, real life. The next morning, he packed his few belongings, a small backpack with the essentials he had carried all this time. Claire watched him, offering a supportive smile, no words needed. As he left the hospital, the sun broke through the clouds, golden and fragile. He took a deep breath, feeling the rain-soaked air fill his lungs. The world was vast, daunting, and uncertain. But for the first time, he was ready to walk into it, not as a shadow, not as a statistic, but as Elijah Turner, a man who had fought, who had survived, and who had earned a chance to live again. Elijah stepped out of the hospital into the early morning light. The city was wet and gleaming, streets glistening from the recent rain, and the air smelled like ozone and possibility. He pulled his jacket tighter, still damp, and felt the familiar ache in his arms and legs. But this time, it didn't weigh him down. It reminded him that he was alive, that he had survived, and that he had done something that mattered. Claire Donovan walked beside him, her crutches steadying her steps. She didn't speak much, but the quiet presence beside him was enough. Her eyes, once filled with judgment, now held respect, awe, and something else, a vulnerability that only someone who had faced mortality could carry. Richard Donovan waited outside in a sleek black car. He nodded at Elijah with a mixture of pride and caution. "Your ride if you want it," he said simply. Elijah paused. The offer was more than transportation. It was a chance at a new life, a step into a world he had always observed from the sidelines. He glanced at Claire, then at the city stretching before him, rain-soaked but alive. I'll take it, he said quietly. Not for them, not for recognition, but for himself. Inside the car, the leather seats smelled new and strange, but he didn't mind. He let himself sink into them, feeling the vibration of the engine beneath him, the hum of the city around him. For the first time, he imagined a future where he didn't have to fight for every scrap of survival, a future where he could breathe without constant fear. Claire spoke softly. You know, people will talk about you forever, about what you did, but don't let that define you. You're more than the hero from a headline. Elijah nodded, staring out at the passing streets. I know. I've lived most of my life unseen. That's who I am. But now, maybe I can be more. The car rolled through the city, past puddles reflecting the morning sun, past people rushing to work, past the homeless shelters and neon signs. Elijah noticed everything, yet it all seemed new. Every reflection in the puddles, every laugh from a passing child, every honk and rumble of the city. It was a symphony he had been excluded from, and now he was part of it. Richard spoke again, quietly. We've arranged a place for you, a start, a small apartment, and work if you want it. You've earned it. Elijah's eyes flicked to him, searching for any hint of patronizing tone, but found none. Only honesty, only opportunity. He exhaled, a long, shivering breath that released months, no, years, of tension, fear, and cold. Thank you, he whispered. I won't waste it. Claire smiled faintly. I'll hold you to that, she said, though her tone was gentle. As the car drove away, Elijah Turner felt the weight of his past finally loosen. He wasn't defined by the streets, by the judgment of others, by rejection or poverty. He was defined by what he had done, what he could do, and by the choices he made from this moment onward. For the first time, the world didn't feel like something he survived. It felt like something he could live in. And somewhere deep inside, in the quiet beneath the ache and the mud and the fire, a spark ignited, a spark of hope, courage, and the simple, profound truth. He was no longer invisible. Weeks passed after the bus disaster, but Elijah Turner's life had already begun to change in ways he had never imagined. The small apartment the Donovan family had arranged for him was modest, a single room with peeling paint, a small kitchenette, and a bathroom whose tiles had seen better days. Yet it was warm, dry, and entirely his. For the first time in years, he had a place to call home. No wet cardboard under bridges, no alarms at 4 a.m. from police or other sleepers, just walls, a bed, and the faint hum of a city that never truly slept. Every morning he woke to sunlight filtering through the blinds, feeling it on his face as he stretched sore muscles from the accident. The ache in his arms and legs was a constant reminder, but one he now wore as a badge, proof of survival, proof of action. He could still recall the tilt of the bus, the flash of lightning, the screams and smoke, the burning gasoline, and the way every life depended on his courage in that storm. It haunted him, yes, but it also empowered him. Elijah began volunteering at a local community center, an organization that helped people struggling with poverty, homelessness, and addiction. He guided children who had grown up in the shadows of the city, offering them stories of resilience and survival, not as a lecture, but as lived experience. He spoke to elderly residents who had lost families or homes, listening more than speaking, sometimes just holding their hands and letting them know they were seen. Each interaction reminded him of the years he had spent unnoticed, the nights he had walked alone in rain and snow. Claire Donovan visited frequently. Her leg had healed completely, but she carried a quiet, contemplative energy, no longer the brash, entitled woman who had once thrown him off the bus. She would sit on his couch, holding a cup of coffee, talking about her work, sharing stories about passengers who had told her repeatedly how their lives had been saved. At times she laughed, at other times her eyes would well with tears, as though remembering the horror of that night. You know, she said one afternoon, her voice low, I never really understood courage before. I saw it in movies, read about it in books, but nothing compares to what I saw you do. You didn't just save lives. You changed them." Elijah looked at her, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "I didn't do it for recognition," he said. "I did it because it had to be done. But I'm glad it matters to you now." Over time, their bond evolved, not as a romance, though the tension was subtle and undeniable at moments, but as a deep, unspoken trust and mutual respect. Claire often became his bridge to the world he had only observed from the streets, guiding him through social norms, teaching him how to navigate bureaucracy, while Elijah gave her a grounded perspective she had never known, humility born from survival. Richard Donovan, once the cold, calculating businessman, began to see Elijah in a new light. Visits were calm, almost quiet affairs. They discussed practical matters, training, employment opportunities, and Elijah's future. Richard offered connections to charities, support networks, and even public speaking engagements, platforms where Elijah could share his story, not for fame, but to inspire. One evening, Elijah walked alone through the streets he had once known intimately, the alleys, the bridges, the parks. Each location reminded him of hardship, yet now they seemed less like prisons and more like landmarks of endurance. The city, once an indifferent maze, felt alive, welcoming, and even beautiful. He paused by a mural depicting a phoenix rising from flames. It was ironic, almost poetic, how appropriate it felt, the creature reborn from fire, much like him. He thought of the storm, the bus, the passengers, and the fire. The memory of smoke, screaming, and chaos remained vivid, yet it no longer filled him with fear or despair. It had forged him. And in the quiet moments, he realized something profound. He wasn't defined by the streets he had walked, the judgments he had endured, or the hardships he had faced. He was defined by choice, the courage to act when it mattered most. Elijah often returned to the sites he had once called home, not to live in them, but to remember them. He helped those still struggling, offering guidance, food, and hope. Children who had never seen a role model in their lives now looked up to him. Homeless men and women nodded respectfully as he passed. For the first time, he felt a sense of community, a recognition that, though society had often ignored him, he could still make a meaningful difference. One night, after long hours at the community center, Elijah sat on the balcony of his small apartment. The city lights flickered in the distance, rain droplets still clinging to the railings. Claire stopped by with a thermos of tea. They sat together silently, the warmth of the drink and the shared experience bridging words. "You've done more than anyone could ask," she said finally. "You've saved lives, changed minds, even mine." Elijah exhaled, feeling a weight lift from his chest. "I don't do it for thanks," he said. "I do it because it matters, because someone had to." Claire nodded. "And that's why you're not invisible anymore, to anyone." He gazed out over the city, the memory of fire and rain, fear and courage, the chaos and the calm, all weaving into one. A life once defined by survival had shifted into a life defined by purpose. He thought about the storm that had destroyed so much, yet revealed even more, not only the strength within him, but also the potential of every human to act with courage, no matter the circumstances. The night was quiet. The streets glistened under the soft glow of lamplight. Elijah Turner, once a man unseen, once judged by the clothes he wore and the streets he roamed, now carried the unmistakable presence of someone who had lived, suffered, acted, and survived. And as he sipped his tea, feeling the warmth seep through his bones, he allowed himself to dream. Dream of stability, of kindness, of possibility. Dream of a world where he could truly belong. The past, with all its pain, would always be part of him. But the future, bright, uncertain, and entirely his, stretched ahead like an open road, waiting for him to walk it with the same courage he had shown in the fire, the storm, and the chaos. For Elijah Turner, the streets no longer defined him, the city no longer intimidated him. Life, in all its unpredictable, beautiful chaos, had finally begun.